All you lovers of lore and legend, whether student, teacher, parent, teller of tales, or equestrian pole vault champion.
The Great Tales is a podcast about myths and legends from both inside and outside the Christian tradition, and we come to you live on the first and third Thursdays of the month, kind of, sort of, to talk about the great stories that Orthodox Christians have been reading and passing on for centuries, and sometimes even longer than that. So last time we introduced you to the Prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson, one of the two primary sources for Norse mythology. But today we're going to be talking about, let's say, fairy tales. We'll put a pin in that.
Wow, air quotes.
Specifically Russian fairy tales. And as our guide for this first step across the barrier between this world and the next, and fairies, sorry, we have our very first guest on this podcast, Deacon Nicholas Kotar, who is a Russian Orthodox choirmaster, fantasy novelist, translator, and loremaster of Russian fairy tales. So Deacon Nicholas, welcome to the Great Tales.
Thank you so much. I've grown in the world. For Amansul, I was the third, I think.
Oh.
Guest,
and here you're the first one here.
You've been promoted. That's right.
Didn't even invite the voice of Steve, like, at all. So, Listen, I think that he's the most. I know he doesn't have his own show anymore, but I think he's like the most probably airtime for somebody who doesn't have a show. Probably the most airtime on Ancient Faith because he has all the little bits on Lord of Spirits. And he has the yay at the end of every Amun Sul episode.
There it is.
So, like, it's just hard to compete with that.
He tried to turn his back on content creation, but he lives forever.
Yes. That's right. That's right.
So, yeah.
Oh boy. So I just want everybody to know. I know that there are people who every episode they're dissatisfied with my studio setup, and so I want you to know that although my surroundings here are bleak and barren, that is because this is a new structure, which I have built. So this is the sort of the maiden voyage, or you could say like the test run of the new recording studio. It's not finished, but hopefully by the next episode, or certainly the one after that, there will be a giant bookshelf back there, and the walls will be textured, and the light fixtures will be fixtured, and everything will be very lovely.
The great barn of podcasting.
But I will still be wearing a plaid shirt to the podcast. So I didn't realize so many people had such visceral reactions against like the plaid shirts. It's just because it's cold. Like,
does it get cold in Texas?
I will have you know that it snowed 4 inches last night.
Ooh.
Yeah.
4. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's very
like basically, civilization just shut down. So yeah. All right. So very glad to have you here, Father Deacon Nicholas.
It's so good to be here. Thanks. Thank you so much.
I understand that you have brought a couple of fairy tales with you. So what are the? So you can tell this is live radio and tries to figure out what he's supposed to be saying.
So I mean, like literally since the last episode, the reason this was delayed was because my house flooded, and I've been living in a hotel with 6 children, including a newborn.
Because
for the last
clearly everyone involved in the symbolic world has to experience a flood.
That is true
at some point.
Absolutely.
So like,
it is true.
If Richard comes and offers you a job. Say no.
Yeah. Your house will flood. It'll happen. So, all right. So anyway, I'm sorry. I'm still catching up. I'm still catching up on things. Yeah. All right.
Well, okay. So the stories I'm bringing are sort of the non-traditional, some of the non-traditional ones. I think most people would have assumed there'd be something with a firebird, or everybody's favorite. For those people who know about Russian fairy tales, would think that I would do something like Prince Ivan and the Grey Wolf, which is probably the one that's the most retold. But I decided that we would go a little bit obscure for various reasons. So I'm telling you 2 stories, or not? I'm not telling you. We're talking about 2 stories. One is called Marya Morevna, the Wondrous Queen, which is we'll talk about that. And the other one is the Chestnut Roan, or horse, which is one of the cycle of the Ivan the Idiot stories, which is why I wanted to bring it, because nobody can have enough Ivan the Idiot in their life.
Yeah. And I'll say, by the way, especially for those of you who are listening to the recording or watching this later on, you can, if you've never read either one of those stories, you can simply find the YouTube entry for this episode, and there's a link there, and you can read the actual texts that we read in preparation for this. So, but if you haven't read it yet, and especially if you're listening or watching live, welcome. We are going to summarize things a little bit, so you won't be completely lost. But yeah, I think this is going to be fun because, like, especially for my own part, these are two stories that I had never read before. I'm not actually really versed in Russian fairy tales. I've read a few things over my life, but never lots. But anyways, before we get directly into that, since this is our first episode where we're talking about fairy tales at all, I thought we could take a few minutes and just kind of discuss a sort of a theory of fairy tales, fairy tales in general, right? So, let's begin with you, Deacon Nicholas. Like, how did you? I mean, I know you're of Russian ethnicity, but how is it that you got into Russian fairy tales? I assume that not all Russians are super into this literature.
Well, I think most Russians are versed in it because whether they're born in the diaspora or back in Russia, it's the fairy tales are so much a part of the upbringing of just the standard child that even now, even with the breakdown of the language that happened after World War II and the breakdown of culture that happened over the course of the Soviet yoke, you still have people's deep connection to at least the images and the tropes and the ideas of the stories. Plus, you have to understand that the best of Soviet cinema is Russian fairy tales filmed, and they're quite remarkable. They're very, very good films for the most part. There's some of them are terrible, but most of them are really good.
It's not the late '80s renditions of The Hobbit and the Lord.
No, I mean actual live action films. So it's remarkable. Like in the 50s and 60s, you have, the special effects leave much to be desired, but they put in a ton of work into costume detail, into set design, and as much practical effect as you possibly could have had during that time. It was a real matter of pride for Russians, and it was a matter of showing, sort of the greatness of the Soviet project, unfortunately. And ultimately, it didn't work because it just showed all the things that the Soviets kind of received by default, but weren't able to really develop on much.
I know that the Soviets, wherever they went, were often like okay with folk culture of various sorts, and kind of trying to show like, oh, we're not here to destroy that. We're here to actually.
Well, okay, so I'm going to qualify that because that is true in retrospect. But something that's really interesting, and this will, I think, help us define what a fairy tale is, even with those offensive air quotes No,
I just find it a really inadequate term. But anyway, continue.
Okay. All right, fine. There was a very strange early Soviet experiment in using the forms of Russian epic poetry, which is a subgenre of Russian fairy tales. You could say that. I mean, I'm sure that the specialists right now are yelling into their computer screens and basically denouncing me as an idiot who doesn't know anything about anything, which might be true.
Cope and C specialists.
Oh, I like this. All right, I must remember this. Cope and C. Oh, this is good. Yes. So there were attempts to write. They're called byline. In the proper meter, in the proper song structure, these folk renditions of the rise of Stalin, and they are horrific. You read them out and you cannot help but laugh because they're so bad. So, which is not the effect that they were hoping for.
Is there a Russian word for cringe?
I'd have to think about that. Probably there is, and it's probably very ancient, and it probably has all kinds of other kind of connotations in there. So I'll get back to you on that. Maybe my subconscious will provide it during the course of this conversation. But yeah, it didn't take, mostly because I think everybody started to laugh, and you can't laugh. The Soviets were not okay with laughter. This is, we're not up for any sort of satire. That's not okay. So I think what ended up happening was, on the one hand, not everybody in the Soviet times was a horrible person trying to change the culture. Most people were simply trying to get by. And for them, this is just a continuation of a very ancient form of oral storytelling in a new medium, film and radio, with some of the really incredible international caliber acting, both vocal and in front of the screen. So most people will have encountered the stories, at least in that form. But I would say that probably, I mean, I have no way of actually quantifying this, but it would really surprise me if most young families these days don't still tell these stories to their kids, at least in the form that they were put into print in the 19th century. It's part of the same kind of movement that you all talked about last time. The kind of the elites coming back to the folk culture and trying to institutionalize it or put it into some kind of more immovable form, which has its negatives, of course, because it doesn't continue as an ongoing oral storytelling tradition. But on the other hand, it's something that unites an entire culture, nation, ethnos behind a series of images that are very profound, and that actually in the Russian case in particular, have this wonderful quality of capturing the deep and long process of Christianization from pagan into really Christian culture in the most radical sense, that was not preserved in the official literature, because, as often happened in European contexts, all of the existing literature from the pagan times would have been just destroyed. So the transition is still there. You can see it. You can sense it in certain images and certain movements and certain storytelling styles. But that's a very long-winded answer to a rather simple question.
No, I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, this dovetails well into my next question, which is like how exactly do we define a fairy tale? And you kind of hinted towards it. There are some who would say that fairy tales are a specifically Christian thing, at least in the way that in the West that we think of fairy tales. Like, is a fairy tale a pagan story that survives into Christian period with some alterations? Like, is it something that was once a great myth and now it's sort of this lesser?
Oh man, Richard is about to explode.
I don't know. I mean, I'm asking, because
listen. So okay.
Here we go. Richard rant, everyone.
You could tell whenever Richard starts by saying, okay, that
and the long sigh that goes
this
into
canned thing he's about to deliver.
So I don't. So I know exactly what is meant by it when we say a fairy tale, and so in that sense, it's a fine term, because it's effectively communicating. But it's what do you call these stories in Russian, Deacon Nicholas? Like, this is actually a question that I wanted to ask. Like, what do you call these stories in Russian?
Oh man, like you have to be careful about these like tangential questions you ask a Russian, because they will result in a Dostoevsky length answer.
I mean, it. It's fine. Yeah.
All right. So this is really interesting.
Yeah.
The word story is a very difficult one to translate, right? You know how Americans thought in English you can say, story in a kind of general sense, like, what do you do? I tell stories,
right?
Or like in the business world, you're often talking about how to incorporate story into your marketing materials to make it more interesting. So like that idea of story being this kind of meta category of a kind of way of speaking to people, it really doesn't work in Russian, even though Russia has a profoundly ancient tradition of oral storytelling. So that's a very interesting point, I think, and I'm not sure what to make of it entirely. And in Russian, when I talk about stories with Russians, because I like to talk about stories to people, as you know, and the language that I use in English, the kind of categorization and the meta analysis of story, using that kind of critical language, it's very difficult to translate into Russian. But they're called сказки, which is the word сказка is simply it means fairy tale, but it could also mean story in the larger sense. But even the Russians don't really use it that way. But you will have qualifiers as well. So to answer Father Andrew's question, you will say сказка in Russian, but you can mean a whole bunch of different things in it, and you won't know what that is until the story begins. So you have really ancient волшебные сказки, magical wonder tales, they're called in English, which I think it's a wonderful way of talking about it. Martin Shaw uses that term.
I like wonder tales a lot. The Greek word, the German word for this kind of a story is like a Märchen, right?
Yeah.
So the word fairy is like an old French word for like an enchanted realm or a particular kind of enchanted being.
Right.
Fairies properly, however you want to, that itself is problematic. We're never going to get out of the introduction.
Yes.
Fairies properly do not appear in any German fairy tale.
Or Russian ones.
Yeah. And so that's why, like, when you say fairy tale, it's kind of like, okay, I know what we mean by this, but I just wish there was like a more satisfactory term. That was the reason for the scare quotes.
Okay. Well, I mean, until the three of us come up with the proper way of talking about this, we're probably gonna have to just deal with fairy tale.
Listen, if we really put our minds to it in the next 3 to 4 hours, I think we can solve this. Yeah. So to answer, yes, indeed. To get back to the question. Yeah. Okay.
In Russian, you're not gonna know based on the category what kind of a story it is, but there are still a lot of different kinds of fairy tales, if we're going to use that term, in the Russian tradition, and some are better than others. The more ancient they are, generally, the better they are, because the more ancient they are, the more they've been retold, the more they've managed to master the archetypal language. Maybe some people don't like that term either, but thematic, whatever you want. The way of speaking about the world is symbolic, where you're talking about multiple realities at the same time, and you have to have a kind of key to be able to fully appreciate what's going on. And that key is not a key to unlocking specific meanings that are going to then give us a kind of puzzle, 2 + 2 = 5, but rather that give us a language or a Rosetta Stone to be able to understand the way of thinking and the way of speaking and the way of passing on information that these stories have. So the really ancient ones are some of the best ones for that reason. They're also the ones that have the fewest overt references to Christianity, which is really interesting, even though they will be the most easily recognizable in terms of the moral and thematic structure of the story to a Christian mind. All that to say that you won't have the kind of dark North paganism that you have in the Northman in the old stories, even if you will have things like leftovers of animism, things like shape-shifting kings and crone figures and things like this, which would have been very, which an ancient person would be very comfortable with, an ancient pagan person would be very comfortable with that, with those kinds of images, those kinds of stock characters. And it's bizarre. Like the more overt references to Christianity you have, the later the story will be, and probably the worse the story will be. And again, I'm speaking kind of in generalizations, but some of the worst in the Russian tradition are the kind of stock meet the devil at the crossroads stories, which often involve a very immoral soldier figure.
Is it because he was looking for a soul to steal?
Well, obviously.
That's the wrong Georgia. That's my bad.
By the way, Georgian and Russian folktales have a lot in common, even though Georgians are not Slavs, obviously. But it's interesting that deep ancient Christian cultures tend to tell similar stories. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, right. So, Devil at the Crossroads often also include immoral priest figures. So those are all folk tales told primarily in villages from in peasant collections of audiences, and would not have been appreciated by elite audiences in the 19th century as the older stories would have been. And then you have the even more specific subgenre of Russian epic poetry, which is a kind of para-historical, almost hagiographical retelling of the origins of the Russias, if I can express myself that way. And that has a very specific, very formalized structure. You have to sing it. It has a certain kind of rhythm to it. It has a certain kind of certain things have to happen, have to appear. They have to appear in certain order. It's much, much more regimented than the wonder tales that can be retold and have been retold, especially recently. The Symbolic World Summit in particular, Martin Shaw gave a rendition of one of the old Firebird tales that you would never find in a collection because it was so. I mean, it had references to all kinds of 20th century musicians in it. It was great.
It had
the way you're supposed to do it.
My favorite thing is that, at the end of this Russian fairy tale, there is a wedding, of course, and at all weddings the world over, there's always a little Irish fiddler named Seamus. This is something I learned from him. And I've heard him tell a few different fairy tales, and anytime there's a wedding in one of Dr. Shaw's stories, there's always an old Irish fiddler named Seamus. It doesn't matter where the wedding is happening. It could be happening in Africa. It doesn't matter. Yeah. No,
the Russians don't have the stock fiddler, but they do have an unfortunate and much mustachioed fellow who's trying to drink his fill at this feast that's covering the whole world, and the beer never makes it to his mouth because it drips along the sides of his massive mustaches. So that happens at the end.
But he's the narrator, right? He's sort of like the teller of the tale, maybe.
Well, no. Okay. In movie versions of it, that's how it would work. There would be a framing device, and I think probably in more kind of formal settings, you probably would use a framing device like that, but. These fairy tales, they don't like framing devices. They're too chaotic for that.
That guy shows up in some Lithuanian fairy tales too, by the way.
Yeah, okay, cool. And the thing now that draws these two images together of the little Irish fiddler named Seamus and the mustachioed drinker of Russian fairy tales is that, and this is real, this is true. When the Romans landed on Great Britain in England, and they saw the Britons, right, the Celts there for the first time. One of the things that they wrote down that they saw was that these guys they were basically completely shaven except for these massive mustaches.
That's true.
And they commented about how utterly uncouth and barbaric this was because these mustachioed barbarians, so there you go. That brings all.
We have actually all read Asterix comics, Father.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, we have.
Have we though?
Yes.
I mean, we know. We actually, Simon, our YouTube guy, told us that our demographic for this show is like 90%, I think, younger than 30 and male. So have they all read Asterix and Obelix? Young men, all you young, basically it's a bunch of male Zoomers that are apparently the largest part of our audience right now. So
I guess the comments will tell us.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I have a question since we're talking about fairy tales, right? Like one of the things that our last conversation was all about Tolkien. Strangely enough, the three of us, although not on this show. But one of the things that Tolkien says on fairy stories, like this, is he says that what really defines a fairy tale is that it has a eucatastrophe, right? With this sudden, unexpected turn at the end that is, the good, the happy ending, right? Do you think that's true? Does that hold true of Russian fairy tales, of all fairy tales? Is he just thinking about the fairy tales he knows? Which, I mean, is obviously a pretty large body of stuff.
I mean, it's mostly true. Most of the most famous wonder tales will have an unexpected turn. It's sort of necessary for the characters, the male characters especially, to go through some kind of valley of the shadow of death, a kind of underworld sequence, and that underworld sequence will often involve a physical death, and the escape from physical death is very much a eucatastrophe. But there are. It's actually not that uncommon to have an almost classical kind of tragic flavor to some of the Belin, some of the epic poems. There's one in particular that I love called Sukhman the Warrior, which is a very strange story because Sukhman is not a Russian name, so it's clear that this warrior is some sort of probably from nomadic Asiatic stock. And what's he doing in the court of Prince Vladimir in a time when they're the enemy? It's unclear. And it's not clear that he is a Christian convert either, although oftentimes you will have Christian imagery in those tales. It's a wonderful, it's almost a Tolkienian kind of Silmarillion tale where he takes offense at something that the prince tells him, and he goes off on this wild rampage against what seems like his own people, or maybe a different tribe of similar peoples, and he's mortally wounded, and he he stops his wounds with a bunch of dead greenery, so leaves and moss and things like this. And it's wonderfully resonant and symbolic image that he's able to continue to continue hacking everyone to death while he's kind of given life by greenery. And then he finishes and he pulls it out, and his lifeblood flows out, and he dies under a tree. And there's a parallel between him and a river. Like he dies on the shores of a river, and he might actually be the river. So it's really, so you have that kind of thing as well. There are tragedies, but by and large, like the most famous wonder tales, the most famous fairy tales in the Russian tradition will have a eucatastrophic ending for sure. Yeah.
So if someone knew nothing about Russian fairy tales in particular, and you were to give them like your elevator speech of like, this is what makes these different from everything else.
Yeah.
Like what would you say? Like what is the particular genius of Russian fairy tales?
Well, if you're talking to people who've never encountered them, it's just they are not tidy or easy to contain. They've not gone through any sort of enlightenment cleaning process like so many European fairy tales have. Yeah. They're mad. You have princes being chopped. You have there's a lot of really chaotic, weird, violent stuff. But I think the calling card is just the utter weirdness of the imagery. I mean, a hut on chicken feet, an inflatable frog that you sit on that jumps over a river of fire. Why? I don't know. Just because.
What else would you do with a river of fire?
Yeah.
It was actually the frog we were wondering about, Father Andrew.
Oh, it was the frog that was the weird part of that.
That was the weird part there.
Inflatable frogs, yeah, I would think so. And I mean, most people will have heard of at least the name Baba Yaga. So she is very much a calling card. But I think it's just the utter wildness of it to a Western ear. It's actually quite attractive, and I actually have proof that it works, having sold a bunch of fairy tale translations, especially recently.
Can I invite you? Should have done this at the beginning, or maybe we'll do it again at the end. But can I invite you to tell people where they can buy your translations and retellings of these Russian fairy tales? You did a Kickstarter recently that I think was pretty successfwell.
Yeah, it did okay. I mean, we're a symbolic world person here, so they're not that successful, but they did pretty well. You can find them anywhere. I mean, this is not the best time to ask me this because I haven't set up my author store yet, which is where I will send people in the future.
Do you know about things like self-promotion and branding and?
Richard is being very funny.
Wow,
because I do it all the time.
He does it all the time, and he's always on my case for not doing it well. And so I'm just heckling.
So now he's on revenge.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
That's right.
So eventually, and assuming this is going to be an episode that people watch for years in the future.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Go to my website and get it there. But otherwise, just go to Amazon, I guess.
Okay. But I mean, what are your website? What are the books called?
NicholasKotar.com.
.com. Yes.
Yeah. What are the books called?
Well, so they're called In a Certain Kingdom for the first 2 volumes, and volume 3 is In a Certain Land, and it's probably going to continue in the certain land. The reason has to do with actually ancient faith. The first 2 books are translations of stories that I told in the In a Certain Kingdom podcast while I still had it on ancient faith, and I've since moved away. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on an ancient faith station.
This is live radio. You can say anything right now. We
can't stop you. We can't stop you.
Yeah.
I mean, are you doing the podcast still? Like
I haven't. So you're the first people to hear about it, but officially. But yes, Circe Institute and I are bringing it back.
Right on.
Nice.
In about 2 months or so.
I love those people. That's wonderful.
There will be some kind of live event, me storytelling with actual live music, with Natalie like playing the accompaniment in person somewhere.
Where?
We're working at the details. Well, I was gonna do it actually at their spring conference, but then I looked at the dates and it's on the first week of Lent.
What?
And I was
these pagans.
So I wrote my bishop. I'm like, what do you think? Can I leave for like the last 3 days of the first week? And his answer was, "You will be on Kleros." I was like, yes, I will.
Yeah, there you go. Well, so listen, I hear that the summer Circe conference is going to be way better anyway. So
well, I might be in the old country, so that could be a problem. But we'll set something up sometime some time. So we are in communication about the details of it. So
All right. Okay. Well, we've done introing for 30 minutes now. So,
nice.
Yeah. I mean, we could go on for forever, as we have discovered.
There's still a few more terms I would like to argue about and define, but we can just do it later. We can. Do
All right.
it later.
But we do have 2 stories to get through. And the first one that we're going to talk about is, and I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce this, Marya Morevna. Did I do okay?
That's exactly right.
Oh. Thank you very much. The Wondrous Queen. And so why don't you give a quick summary for the people that didn't bother to read the story?
Well, it's a really interesting tale. So there's a king and a queen, as often these tales begin. And as these tales often begin, the king and queen die because they have to. That's what happens at the beginning of all of these tales. This king and queen in particular have 4 children, a prince named Ivan, because all princes are named Ivan, or at least the good ones are. The bad ones are named things like Dmitri and, what's another one? Vasily is a very bad one, yeah.
Wow.
And he has 3 sisters. Daniil's also a bad one. Did I say that? I might have said that twice. Never mind. So he has 3 sisters and he has to take care of them. So what does he do? He takes them out on walks in the garden, because that's what you do when you take care of your sisters. And every time he does, they are attacked by forces of nature that turn out to be shape-shifting princes who are who are a falcon, or hawk, depending on how you translate that, an eagle, and a raven.
Werebirds.
Werebirds, yes, but I don't like it.
Mm.
I know, it's not a very euphonious term, but werebirds.
It's not really right, because the animal part is like secondary to the prince part. So
damn,
I don't know.
Quibbling about terms. I like it.
Yes. And so they come in a sequence of years. Every year they go out on this very important walk in the garden, and each time a suitor comes and takes one of the sisters, and they're very happy to be taken by these princes, which is odd, but one just accepts these things as part of fairy tale logic. And then he gets bored. He has nothing to do. So he goes off on a journey, leaving his kingdom, by the way, which is interesting. That is not commented upon, but it's a kind of subtext that something's not quite right. And he happens upon a field of battle where there's a bunch of warriors that are dead or dying in very gruesome fashion. And 1 or 2 of them are still alive. And he asks them, who did this vile thing? And they go, it was Marya Morevna, the Wondrous Queen. And he's like, I gotta get to know this chick. Who's this Marya Morevna, the Wondrous Queen? And this is amazing. So he happens upon another field, which is filled with tents. And sometimes they're white, sometimes they're gold, depending on the teller. And she comes out and says, hello, Prince Ivan, because everybody knows Prince Ivan. He's Prince Ivan. And she goes, come and stay a while.
It's very intense.
Yes, and he's like,
I was gonna make a tense situation joke, but
it happened. Very
my gosh.
So she invites him into her tent, and they spend a few days there, and it's kind of just like without comment, and then they get married.
Okay.
And she takes him home with her, which is very odd, but she does. She takes him home with her, and they live a very nice, happy life for about a year. Then she gets bored, because she's Marya Morevna, the Wondrous Queen, and
because she hears the war winds which I thought is a beautiful detail.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that, the war wind. So she goes off and must answer the call, and she goes off pillaging, leaves him home, and says, "Look, you can do whatever you like, but there are some things that you can't do. Like that room over there in the basement, do not enter." Just don't, right? You must not. So, of course, as soon as she leaves, that's what he does.
The first thing.
The first thing.
Yeah.
So there he finds Koschei the Deathless, chained to a wall, again, without any context or any commentary. Yep. He's just chained to a wall. And he's there, and he's, deathly and skinny and dying and just generally in a bad state. And he goes, please give me water. I'm thirsty. And Prince Ivan, being the jolly nice man that he is, gives him water 3 times. If you give someone water 3 times and you don't know the stories, you're an idiot. And yes, the prince is the idiot and the idiot is the prince. We'll get to that later. So he feeds him the life force of water. Koschei the Deathless promptly breaks all of his chains, escapes, and says, "Thanks for letting me do this. I'll leave you alive for that. But you can expect to see Marya Morevna as soon as you can see your 2 ears with your eyes," which is a lovely phrase. So as soon as you, so like basically never, right? Immediately he goes like a wind, catches up with her, and takes her away to his kingdom. Ivan is distraught, of course. He must go questing again to find Marya Morevna. He goes, visits his sisters, and they each give him a kind of significant magical artifact, which will become important later. And he finds her, Marya Morevna, in the castle of Koschei when he's out hunting, and he convinces her to come home with him. She's like, "It's not going to happen. He's going to catch us." He's like, "At least an hour or two in your company, I'll be fine." So they go, and this great thing happens where Koschei is starting to come home, and his horse trips under him, and he starts berating his horse. "You useless sack of hay. Why are you tripping under me?" And he does this 3 times. It's wonderful. And the horse says, "Prince Ivan was here, and he took away Marya Morevna." And Koschei's like, "Can we catch them?" And he'll say things like, we can sow a field, wait for the wheat to grow, cut it, get rid of all the, like stomp on it, get rid of the chaff, put it in a granary, cook bread with it, eat the bread, have a feast, and we'll still catch him." And that happens 3 times. Twice, Koschei lets Ivan live. The 3rd time, he kills him. It says, "Sorry, I gave you a chance. You're dead. You're done." And and when he dies, I got it backwards. Ivan gives magical artifacts to his brothers-in-law, not the other way around. So those magical artifacts turn black. They're silver and they turn black. And so the werebirds know that something's wrong. And they do what those birds are supposed to do. They go searching for the water of life and death. They bring it back. They put them back. They put the pieces back together. Put the water of death on him, which makes him whole. Pour the water of life on him, which wakes him up. And he goes immediately back to find Marya Morevna and says, "Let's go. We need to go." And she's like, "Wait, let's do it differently this time. Let me find out something from Koschei himself. Like, I need some insider information." So she does the thing that the virgin does to the dragon. She feeds him. She gives him compliments. She tells him how wonderful he is, and she asks very telling questions that no person in the right mind would answer because they're so telling. But it always works because of the flattery and the food. And basically asks, "How are you so fast? How can you catch up with us so every time?" And he says, "Well, there's this Baba Yaga person out there, and she has the fastest horses in the world. And I took care of these horses for 3 days, and I didn't lose a single one. And as payment, I received a foal from one of those fast horses." So she tells Ivan. Ivan goes and does it. Except it's a trick, because Baba Yaga's horses are like, remember those horses, like the skeletal scary horses in Harry Potter, like the really nasty scary ones. They're like that, and except they have brains and they can talk, and they're like they really don't like you. Like you will not. So they try to escape every which way they can. But then here's the catastrophe. Like the good things that he's done in the past come back and help him. And various forces of nature conspire to make sure that the horses never get lost. So at the end, Baba Yaga is like, "I'm not okay with this. Like we have to kill him in his sleep or something, because this is like, I've done this once before. I don't like it." So he has to steal a foal, and it immediately becomes a full-grown warrior horse, of course. And then he goes and he's able to escape with her. Koschei catches them anyway, which is odd. But then he ends up fighting him in single combat, and the horse helps him defeat Death, and Death is killed. Only to come back to the next story, of course. And then they basically come home, and then everything is the right way up. He comes back to his kingdom, and she comes back as his queen.
Yeah.
And everything then is okay, because they've all essentially they've had their fun, they've sown their wild oats, and they've occupied their archetypal roles now, and now the world can be a settled place again. And that's how it is.
All right.
So I have
a fun story.
I have questions.
Uh-oh.
I have questions.
I've heard you say that just that way before.
So this character, which I've realized literally now I've been saying his name wrong my entire life.
Oh, Ivan, yeah. It's
no, not Ivan, but is it Koschei? How are you saying that?
Koschei.
Koschei.
Koschei. Because it has that special Russian letter, which is
which some Russians don't do the sh, but that's a different conversation.
Oh, okay, so
you can tell the region of Russia you're from by how much you aspirate that sh.
Got it. Oh. Okay, all right. So he's in like a lot of stories.
He is,
and I mean, like him and Baba Yaga. Those are the two like kind of like stock characters.
The stock villains,
stock villains that seem to come up over and over again. So this is actually a pretty unusual thing. As somebody who reads a lot of wonder tales, I'm gonna just keep saying it until it catches on more. Yeah, as somebody who reads a lot of wonder tales, it's not uncommon to have certain stock villain types like the wicked stepmother, etc. But to have a named,
that's my question as well. Like, why is it always the same guy?
And you do sometimes see that just like a little bit in like German fairy tales, for instance. But even then, the name is usually not like a real name. It's like it's not a proper name. Like it's a name that has to do with like some metaphysical aspect, right?
Well, this is not a proper name either.
Okay, so
Koschei is bony. It means bony.
Yeah. Okay, so that is exactly what I was trying to like
Skeletor?
towards.
Yes, it's Skeletor.
It is okay. That's canon. That's the only way I'm going to remember this from now on. And I get it now. Like he gets defeated at the end of the episode, but he's always back up to his old tricks.
Well, because his name is Skeletor the Deathless. Besmертный is the Deathless.
Yeah.
Which is it's the irony is only in the kind of lived memory of the people, because if you read the stories, you think this guy's not deathless, but of course he is, because he keeps coming back.
Okay, all right. And then his relationship to Baba Yaga, who is a witch or a
crone.
Well, okay, Baba Yaga is a topic unto itself. I'm not well versed in the critical literature on this. I've read a little bit of it. There's a lot of stuff that people have written about Baba Yaga because she's a powerful woman figure, right? And in some ways, she's kind of like the wild mother or the archetype of crone, Well, yes, in some ways, the devouring mother. So there are some people who think that she is a conflation of two characters to the detriment of the storytelling tradition. I have heard this, read this opinion in some works that I actually like a lot. I don't like that idea. It might be historically true, but I prefer it not be, because I think that the idea of the crone figure being ambiguous is far more interesting. Maybe it's just interesting to me as a modern person.
Can you tell us, or like what are the two figures?
So the two figures are the devouring mother, and the other one is the ancient, the wise crone, the forest figure, who is an important threshold figure especially for women characters in almost all storytelling traditions.
I'm thinking about Hansel and Gretel, for instance. Right. Yeah. They go out there, and I mean that's literally the devouring mother. She's going to eat them. But she's also this sort of witch out in the woods, kind of.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the unspoken secret in the Hansel and Gretel story is that the witch with the witch who's trying to cook them in the oven is also their mother.
Yes.
And like if you read the story, that's extremely clear.
Yeah. And by the way, Jonathan made that point and Pints with Aquinas recently, which I thought was cool. But
that's fun.
He had a long conversation about fairy tales there. So this person that thinks this is a conflated character hews to the idea that there were two crone figures in ancient Russian tales. One was a positive figure, one was a negative figure, and the two became kind of combined. And in the popular imagination, the combination was to the detriment of the wise crone figure.
I see.
So that the villainy kind of took over. That's possible. However, if you're just looking at the stories without trying to explain them away,
it's not necessary.
She does both, and sometimes in the same story. And it really it depends on who you are, whether you're a girl or a boy, and how you relate to her. Like, what are the forms of address that you offer to her as this threshold figure? And if you have the right words, if you have the right language, if you have the right ritual, if you have the right knowledge, then she will help you, even if she threatens to kill you, to eat you at every turn. And more often than not, she does play this kind of more positive figure, especially in stories that feature prominent girls who have stepmothers. There's a Russian Cinderella story that we're not talking about where she's very menacing, but at least on the surface, like she's just, you don't want to mess with her, but she ends up giving a tremendous amount of help to this main character while also destroying a whole bunch of other female characters in the story, including the stepmother, which is a really interesting, twist on the.
Oh yes, wouldn't it be great if the fairy godmother took on the wicked stepmother and destroyed her in Cinderella?
Yeah. Well, she'd have to be pretty terrible as a godmother. So I mean, she couldn't be that that plump ball gown thing with a shiny stick, right?
Oh, man, you're definitely going to have to come back. And I want to talk about Russian Cinderella.
In the German, I just have to also say, in the German Cinderella story, it's not a fairy godmother. It's her sainted mother.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
And the Holy Spirit. And anyway, okay, sorry.
Okay. So I mean, and it's funny. I mean, as we were saying before we started, whenever I heard of this character, I always heard it pronounced Baba Yaga.
That's how we say it,
which is a very Englishizing kind of way of but Baba Yaga sounds
even scarier.
More Russian. So she's.
I just have to say, by the way, that one of my sons, Edmund, somebody gave us this Baba Yaga storybook with really beautiful, really well illustrated, really beautiful art, and it is his favorite book, and it terrifies him. But it's his favorite book. Yeah, he loves it.
That unholy childish terror is one of the greatest memories of my childhood.
It is.
Yeah, and so I love that feeling.
I got to finish telling the story. One time, one of my sisters, for some special occasion or something, she's really into costuming kind of stuff, not cosplay, but she makes her own prosthetics for things.
Oh wow.
And cool. she made herself into the most terrifying Baba Yaga, it was. Okay,
we need to talk
horrifying.
with her. I need to reach out to this person because I have plans for Baba Yaga. Prosthetics might be involved.
Ooh. My children's trauma from when Aunt Hope showed up and they opened the door and then it was Baba Yaga is deep trauma. And the thing is, your kids are going to go to therapy anyway, so you may as well give them a good reason, I think. It's my parenting philosophy.
I mean,
did we just lose?
She's probably.
Did we just lose?
We can bring him
Father
back.
Deacon Nicholas.
Oh, yeah, you can tell it's live there. But I'll say while we try to get him back. I think she's probably the figure that of any Russian fairy tale figures, she's the one that people have heard of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I tend to think I don't know. It's probably because it's just the whole chicken-footed house thing is probably the reason why.
Yep.
But also I grew up in a household where my dad listened to classical music a decent amount, and of course one of the things. Oh, yeah. Great! Oh, I think we got Deacon Nicholas back there. Hopefully, we'll get his audio back here. So that's how you can tell it's a live show, everybody.
Live show.
So of course, one of my favorite bits of classical music is pictures at an exhibition by Mussorgsky, and one of the pictures at the exposition is a Baba Yaga painting, and I don't remember. I remember that has a sort of sound to it. There's this sort of percussive thing going on there. Although I think the best theme in that in pictures at exhibition is probably the Great Gate of Kiev. Which is very, very recognizable probably to a lot of people.
Yeah. Most people would be like, "Oh, I didn't know that's what that was," but they've heard.
Yeah. I'm not going to hum it for everybody or whatever, but go look it up. It's on the YouTube somewhere, I'm sure, or wherever else. So Deacon Nicholas, can you hear us again? I'm guessing not. I see him typing there. All right, we'll get him back. He must have lost his internet connection because both
audio
sound
and
yeah. So I mean, what is up with the chicken-footed house? what is that all about?
You can't ask me. I mean,
I don't know. Oh, I see him still looking at the screen, so he must.
Yeah,
have.
I mean,
what do you think? What do you think while we're putting this up there? Like,
okay. Yeah, the chicken-footed house. The chicken-footed house. Boy, this would be a great one to throw at Mr. Peugeot. Like,
what is the symbolism?
Yeah.
By the way, I know that someone that we know has actually trolled Jonathan through his Q&A.
Nice.
And has asked weird questions like, what is the symbolism of this?
Yeah, Jonathan is such a deeply sincere person. Like, he would just try to answer it. Yeah. I don't know what's up with the chicken-footed house, honestly. Like, it's something I've never really sat down and thought about it. Yeah. All right. So we gotta fill time here while Father Deacon gets his audio back on.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that struck me about like this particular story, right? Like we were talking about Koschei the Deathless, and he like it's interesting. Oh, are you back?
Yeah, he's back.
Am I back?
Yeah,
Yes.
you're back. You're back.
Okay. Before we get into
we were just trying to figure out why.
What is the deal? What is the deal with the chicken-footed house? What is that?
What is the deal with that?
You expect me to give you a straight answer? Okay, so there's the Orson Scott Card answer. Are you ready? All right, so the Orson Scott Card answer is that there was time travel involved, and a Boeing 747 appeared in 9th century Russia, and the immensity of the thing on top of the small wheels made it look like a hut on chicken feet, which is seriously the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's one of the worst usages of
what was this
traditional fairy tale tropes. This is it's a book called Enchanted. It's Orson Scott's Card's only foray into time travel Russian fairy tale based fantasy.
Well,
which is I suppose it's sci-fi.
I guess we're glad that he.
It's a terrible
do
book.
Any more of that? Yeah,
it's a terrible book. I mean,
it's okay if the answer to this question is, look, it's just a thing.
Yeah. Well, okay, so there are these memes going out on the internet with like these old Sami houses, which were built on top of pillars or on top of felled trees that make it look sort of like chicken feet. Yeah. Or there's these other memes out there with that purport that there was this practice in ancient Eastern Europe where you would have the actual crone of the village, some sort of shamanic figure who would live raised up above the earth on some kind of raised platform house that would put her in a metaphorically high place. Yes.
Yeah, halfway between heaven and earth, and
it's entirely possible. All these things.
Okay, so like these are like an attempts at historical origins.
Yes.
But like, well, what does it mean in the story? Like, why? Why is she on a house that with is it so that it can move? Is that I don't know.
So let me just tell you how you encounter it, and then you can make your own decision.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Significant it is.
Take us on a little journey.
Not that I'm planning on going and trying to encounter the hut of. I mean, she's kind of scary.
You should.
I'm tender-hearted
for it. No. You need to be ready because you don't always expect to encounter her when you do, and once you do, you need to know the words. So
I'm not expecting to encounter her, but before my wife left earlier, there was a room she said not to open, and I'm really feeling like.
Be careful.
Maybe I need to open that door now. So.
So she's often at the edge of a clearing, even though the clearing is often in the depths of the woods. So again, this kind of liminal in-between space between the worlds of civilization and the world of wildness. The hut, when encountered, is spinning around itself at top speed. It's in chaotic motion. And the first thing you have to do is to get it to stop. So you have to say the right words, which really oddly The Witcher uses in season 2. Hut, stop your spinning, turn around and face me. Those of you who watched Witcher, that's who the character is. It's the Polish version of Baba Yaga. They totally messed up that character. They made her into a demon that possesses young girls, which is not who Baba Yaga is. It's just stupid. Anyway, but that part is right. You're supposed to address the hut. You're supposed to get it to stop, and only then will it open for you, and then you encounter Baba Yaga. So there is something about mixed spaces, boundaries, things that don't match, and chaos in motion that Hybridity. Is all kind of But really, it's the real reason is because the original Russians knew that someday there would be a situation where you would be able to actually build a foam house, attach fake chicken feet on it, and run through public markets while a man dressed as an old woman runs after it yelling with a broom. That's really the reason.
I'm assuming this is a personal experience you're relating to us right now.
There's a video out there. There's a video out there. Yeah, there's a video of the hut running away from Baba Yaga in a Russian public market. It's amazing. It's wonderful.
Okay, I mean it's funny to me though, right? In telling the story, like it's interesting. Like if someone could see our notes, they would know that the way that I wrote the notes is like I start with the protagonists of the story. Like let's discuss them. But we all went straight for the villains. Which is an interesting thing. I don't know.
It's a commentary on who we are as modern.
I guess as humans.
Guess
so. Okay. Before we then, I mean, obviously we have to talk about Prince Ivan and Marya Morevna. Marya Morevna. Can we just call her Masha?
Masha.
She will kill you if you do.
Okay. All right. Yeah. But okay. Koschei the Deathless. All right. So he always dies. He always comes back.
And he dies in really fantastic ways. Like his death is on the edge of a needle, inside of a chest inside of an egg that's inside of a duck, that's inside of a hare, that's inside of a fox, that's inside of a duck. It's wonderful.
At the bottom of the sea.
Or top of a actually no, it's always on top of a tree, and the egg is mishandled by the hero and then falls to the bottom of the ocean. So it covers the entirety of the.
So why does he die in fantastic weird ways? Like what is that all about?
The symbolism of the life of the Deathless One being encased in various representations of eternity is what's going on here. Like the hero has to go through the underworld and he has to overcome the underworld and then kind of find a portal into the overworld if he's going to be able to come back and restore order in the world that's been disordered.
Like one of the things that's interesting about this story to me, and you didn't mention this in your summary, but it was a really fascinating detail to me, is that when Prince Ivan kills him, he has to like burn him and then scatter the ashes.
Yeah.
So what is that all about? Like why? I mean, obviously there's a sense of like, is it because the
finality of it?
Yeah.
Okay. No. Well, on the one hand, it seems like it's the finality of it, but then it's also he's released to the winds, which is kind of stupid because he is in some sense an incarnation of wind, and in a lot of other versions of this villain where he's not named Koschei the Deathless, he will be named things like the Great Wind, or he will do things like ride the wind. So it's possible that this is an inside joke. That you thought you got rid of him, but you're just giving him another form.
You just sent him home.
That stupid Prince Ivan.
Don't throw me in that briar patch. Okay, well let's talk about Prince Ivan because obviously we want to save the titular character I think for last. Okay, Prince Ivan. I mean, he's kind of a zero. I mean, in my opinion, in this story, like who is he? He's kind of not anything. He's sort of like a vessel for everything else to happen.
Yeah, he's the worst version of every man.
Yeah, he's the one who walks through the stage meeting the interesting people.
Yeah, well, in some sense, yes, but you are supposed to associate yourself with him. So I mean, he's okay. The brilliance of these stories is, of course, that they allow for two things to happen. One, you can associate yourself with a princely figure because that figure is like you, a fallible figure. So that's why the prince is often an idiot. It's a way of how the fairy tales are often about redressing grievances, but not in any kind of obnoxious or propagandizing way. But it's about how the world in totality tends to even out whether you're prince or fool.
Yeah.
So
justice.
So totally. In capital J. Yes. Yeah, and that's part of the whole eucatastrophe thing that Tolkien talks about, is how fairy tales do that they provide consolation to those who are in need of an escape of the prisoner. So it's right and proper that a folk tradition would humanize the prince by allowing him to be an idiot. Also, probably because the history of the Russian state is a steady series of idiot princes who spend the first 400 years of their existence fighting each other, killing each other, and then being invaded because they refuse to actually band together like brothers, sometimes killing actual brothers, even as they're hostages, even as their other brothers are hostages. And it's insane. The history of Rus is mad. Anyway, so that's part of it. The other part, of course, is that fairy tales are all about the restoration of the lost, the harmonization of chaos, the consolation of the wounded. They're all about expressing the way that the world beyond can erupt into the present world in ways that provide immediate consolation, not just the promise of a future salvation. Now, this is obviously Christian language, but the way that we've received the stories is through a Christian lens. Even though the stories, as they are told, you do demonstrate and show the passage from paganism into Christianity. So it's important that the prince be as much of an idiot as possible.
So honestly, I actually, in this particular fairy tale, I found the prince to be a pretty compelling character, right? Yeah. As in, really.
He's a better Ivan than in some other Ivan.
Yeah. But I mean, sure. There's definitely. I mean, the fun thing. So Ivan is John, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so is Jack. Jack is another way of saying John, right? And so that's the fun thing in an English fairy tale, wonder tale. Although there sometimes are actual fairies in English fairy tales, but anyway, in an English fairy tale, the protagonist is always Jack. And he's Jacques in French fairy tales, and in German fairy tales, he's Hans, which is John.
John.
Yeah, that's the world, the name the world over of every fairy tale protagonist, right? And but in the sense of like being an everyman, it's sort of like, it's not just an everyman, it's kind of like the soul of man, like the soul of humanity, right? And the thing is, like, if we were clever, we wouldn't need these fairy tales. Like, that's the thing. Like, we get ourselves into kind of all of these problems because we the meme, like, God is like, please don't do the thing, and then immediately, I mean, this is one of the things that they like to debate in the Middle Ages, was how long did Adam and Eve remain uncorrupted in paradise? And the range of acceptable answers is like, not, somewhere between 30 seconds and 9 minutes, something like that. The point is, like, not very long as it happens.
I mean, isn't it doesn't, I think at one point, I mean, St. Maximus kind of prescient about this. He poses the idea that, which, yes, this is not a literal reading of Genesis, but he poses the idea that Adam falls as he comes into being.
Yeah.
That literally, which is sort of his way of trying to deal with how does an unfallen being fall into temptation. Right.
Yeah. But it's to me, like, he's, but also, like, the part of me also feels like, but the poor guy, he's really trying his best here. Like, he's really trying, like, he's trying to get his sisters married off. He's trying to, like, go visit his kinfolk and, like, give gifts and, like, sort of do the right things. But he's just like a little, but then he meets this girl. And this girl
let's
is
talk
like,
about her.
This girl is like, whoa.
Like, should people who are that this stuff is completely new to them, should they be thinking like Xena Warrior Princess? Like, should they be thinking of Lucy Lawless?
Well, she wouldn't be quite dressed like that, but
is this the first Ancient Faith Radio podcast ever to reference Xena Warrior Princess?
I don't know. It's possible.
I doubt it. I doubt it. I have a feeling it's been done before.
I mean, is that the image? No, that's not the image. But
No.
like but this is unusual because I mean,
There's a little bit of like Brunhilde. There's a little bit of
is this a Valkyrie thing? Because usually the princess in a story, or even the queen, is not holding a sword.
No,
she's not like in
not.
the first, and definitely you don't encounter her handiwork of killing as the first. Like that's our introduction to this figure. Is
but
Yvonne
the great thing is that the handiwork of killing is like this is her resume. He's like.
Yes.
He's
Right,
that's
wow,
what I'm thinking.
Look at all of this murder. I would really like to meet this girl. Look at all of these disembowelments. I mean, she must be really something.
I know. I mean, it's because, and I think this I think is one of the ways. Maybe I don't know. I'm just shooting from the hip.
Get the video demonetized now.
Ouch.
Is I think this is one of the ways in which this is not a prototypical. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like this is not a
you're
normal
absolutely
sort of
right.
pagan story.
Yeah.
Because in most pagan stories, with the exception of like goddesses have swords and stuff in pagan stories.
Yeah. Well, in the Russian tradition, you will have warrior women in the Byline, in the epic heroic tales.
Yeah.
And there's one particular wonderful scene where one of the strongest and oldest and wisest of the Russian epic heroes goes off on a journey and encounters a warrior woman who then beats him and promptly puts him into her pocket.
We've all been there.
Right, and then it's just like. And then he's in there. By the way, he's still on his horse. Like he and the horse are both in her pocket.
Sure.
Of course.
As one does.
And she's like, I'm going to pull him out and look at him. If he's old and ugly, I'm going to smash him between my palms. And if he's pretty, I'm going to marry him.
Wow.
And she does. She pulls him out and she marries him. But the story ends with her kind of assuming a more hearth-like existence at the end, and there's all kinds of interesting adventures that happen in the process. Yeah, but to get that's kind of the warrior sub genre anyway, so that's not that weird. But if you're looking at something like the most traditional stories, oftentimes don't even have the women saying anything. Like she's just object of beauty or symbol of goodness, beauty, truth, who's just bandied about by various forces that need her. She doesn't have much agency. She doesn't seem to have much of a choice in anything.
She's the MacGuffin.
Yeah. But here it's the exact opposite. Well, so again, referencing Jonathan's conversation with Matt Fred, he said something that I think is absolutely right, and that is that if you look at the stories, they always come back to the thing that you didn't do before. So if you can't look at a single story and say Russians are chauvinists because they don't like their women, that might actually be true, but it's not because of the fairy tales. The fact is that for every tale of a woman with no agency, that it's meant to be an archetypal vision of beauty and womanhood, there is a Marya Morevna who is out there disemboweling warriors. So yes, it's unusual, but it's certainly not the only version of this. Most women will occupy traditional roles in traditional fairy tales. There's a lot that's not said about Marya Morevna. There's a lot of subtext.
I feel like the reader is supposed to know who she is already.
Well, maybe not. The point is the stories do exist in a kind of how would you say this? Like it's that extended
textual
universe
ruin.
Yes, but I'm thinking more in the modern version of this, where like if you watch the DC extended universe and all the animated films of it, like certain things that show up in the Zack Snyder movies because they're directly related to that or to the comics that inspired it, that sort of thing, right? So there is this kind of, you exist in the world of story in Russia as a young Russian person, so you probably recognize certain things and recognize that this is how it's supposed to be. But I don't think that it's ever that clear, like, oh, she put Koschei Bessmientny is in her basement because ... Like nobody knows. Right. Nobody knows.
Yeah, that was my question. It's like, what is he doing in the basement? And no, apparently we don't know. I mean, I guess like if I tried to put some kind of interpretation on that, right? I might say that, okay, well, what is he? He's the principle of death on some level. And so why do you keep him hidden away? Well, it's because I don't want to die. And so I don't feed death don't feed death and you won't die. I mean, you can interpret that.
But there's an inherent danger in shutting him out instead of having him out in the open. In some
right. So like, like one way, for instance,
way.
to give this maybe a specifically Orthodox Christian interpretation is that this is a way of understanding asceticism. Right? Like there's that old saying, of course, if you die before you die, then when you die, you don't have to die, right? Mm-hmm. So what is Christianity? In some ways is the proper relationship with death. And in which the passions are not simply shut away, they are dealt with in the appropriate way. You know?
Yeah, so then
like,
her killing frenzy is in some sense related to the fact that she's unhealthily locked away her sort of passionate, the darkness at the heart of the hearth, and she's not dealing with it in a way that you're supposed to. So when he's killed at the end, she doesn't go back to her pillaging ways. She occupies the throne of the queen. It's a different way of existence, and it's the more proper one.
Yeah, I would have to say that I think that one of the things that Orthodox Christianity brings to the table in interpreting literature, not just like this, but legendary literature in general, is that baked into our whole way of life is asceticism. It's a whole frame for understanding what humans are and how we're supposed to live. Yeah. That unfortunately is virtually absent or literally absent from Christianity is generally known in the West in whatever form. I'm not saying that this is the key to this story, but I think it's an interesting way of understanding it.
I think you've hit on something that's important, because a Russian person wouldn't even think about categorizing it in that way, because it's such a deeply
innate.
Yeah, in the experience of being a Russian person, whether it's because there are northern people who live through extreme winters, or because monasticism has been part of the culture since the beginning. But it's true, the main character in almost all stories will have to go through some sort of ascetic, either renunciation or loss. That some of it will be quite. I mean, the Cinderella story that we're not talking about today involves doing things like eating bread made out of iron. And wearing out iron shoes and wearing out a staff of iron because of the many miles and leagues that you've walked through with these iron shoes. I mean, how much more of an aesthetic image can you get?
I was just having the same thought literally as Father was saying it is you can kind of look at what Ivan is going through, and this kind of journey through life and death, and it's all the things that he gives away that actually.
Yes.
One of my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life, and there's this moment there at one point when George Bailey is looking at the picture of his father, and a lot of times people don't notice this because it's not, the camera doesn't zoom in on it, like it's just part of the set dressing, but right under his father's portrait there's a little plaque that just says, "The only things you can take with you are the ones you give away." And I'm always interested in the quest that asks you to give something up, and obviously that was like a move that Tolkien did, the quest to lose a treasure. But then there do seem to be a lot of traditional fairy tales actually, which are focused around this, and it's about what you can give away and kind of negotiating those relationships.
It's interesting how we need to move on to our second story, but I just want to say it's interesting to me how so many modern stories, it's not about losing a treasure or like bringing something somewhere to someone. It's about get the talisman and use it to destroy your enemies.
Right, that's right.
And self-actualize some inner power that you already have inherently.
Guys, what if we did keep the One Ring? I mean, we could.
Why not use it against the enemy?
We could annex Greenland in a flash.
That makes this episode very tied to the moment. Someday years from now, someone's gonna be listening to this episode and like, Why did he mention Greenland?
Why did he mention the 53rd State of the Union? I don't know. Like, why did he mention that?
Okay, all right. So our second story, I mean, this is fascinating. This is a fascinating story. I loved reading it, and I'm enjoying talking about it.
Yeah.
I want more. I know. I especially want more Koschei the Deathless, and I definitely want
great.
more.
He's so much fun.
Of Masha, Warrior Princess.
Watch out, Father. She'll come at you when you're least expecting
Warrior
it.
Princess.
Oh, man.
Okay, so our second story is called the Chestnut Roan, Roan. This is a kind of horse for those who are not familiar with that word. Give us the quick and dirty version of that story, Deacon Nicholas.
Well, the first thing is that the title is weird, but that's because there's a rhyme that is an incantation inside the story that is a play on words and has to do with the color of the horse, and it's something that the main character has to say in order to get a desired outcome. So that's why it's called that. It's not the best title. It only really makes sense in Russian. I couldn't even translate it in such a way to make the rhyme work, and I've been doing translation for almost 20 years, so it's hard. Maybe somebody has. And by the way, if anybody who's listening to this knows of a good translation of the actual rhyme, let me know. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. How does it go in Russian? How does it go in Russian so we can hear the rhyme?
Sure. Сивка, бурка, вещая каурка, встань передо мной, как лист перед травой. So Sivka Burka is Chestnut Roan. Veshya Kaurka is it's a play on words. It doesn't matter. It has to do with wisdom and So the story is this: there is a peasant. So we're now away from the royal and down into the agricultural. Doesn't matter. It's still every man. There's a peasant with 3 sons, and of course we all know 3 sons. The first 2 are going to be garbage.
Wait a second. I'm a second son.
I'm a first. I have it really bad.
Yeah, me too.
You're the worst one. Yeah.
I keep having to explain this to my eldest son. He's like, so unfair. I'm sorry, kid. I can give you a lot of things, but I can't give you that. So this is a peasant who's rather successful. He's got a big field, lots of nice wheat. So this is a kind of the setup of a successful peasant who suddenly starts to lose whole swaths of his field to some sort of a marauding raider of some kind. And it's unclear whether it's human or supernatural because some of it's eaten, some of it's stomped. Like it's kind of just a big mess. So he does what the father figure does in these kinds of stories and tells his sons, you guys have to find the robber. You have to figure this out because I can't do it. Obviously, I'm the Lord and Master. I sit in place and don't do anything.
Right. There's important sitting to be done.
Yes. So the first son sleeps through the whole night. Second son sleeps through the whole night, comes up with all kinds of elaborate excuses about how he didn't see anything, and actually there was nothing there. Never mind the fact that it's continuing to be stolen. And reluctantly, with great reluctance, everyone turns to the last son, who is an idiot. All he does is lays about on the shelf.
Can I take a guess at his name?
Please.
I mean, I can also just read the script, but his name is Ivan again.
Yes, of course.
Or Ivanushka.
Actually, it's not. Well, no, it is. There actually are more than one idiot name. The Ivan is the most common one, but there's also Yemelia, which is another one, and Emilian is the full name, and one other one that I'm not recalling at the moment. But it's not so. Interestingly, there are other names for the idiot everyman. I don't know why, but there you go. The prince is always Ivan, no matter what. Well, actually, no. It's a Russian answer. It is, except when it isn't, and except when it isn't, see footnote that's longer than the chapter, right?
Yes.
Right. Susanna Clark is actually Russian at heart.
Yeah, that checks out.
Yes.
Okay, back with the idiot Ivan.
Back to the story. So he lazes about, doesn't do anything all day. He's a total useless fool. He's dirty, and there's a lot of snot imagery, which is lovely. Yeah. I mean, it's very earthy, and.
We just got over this big cold in my family. So
there you go. It is winter season, so now you understand why.
I came dressed to this conversation. I came dressed as a peasant.
He came dressed as the idiot. So this is the thing. Like he understands. This is he occupied the right niche for this conversation. So he goes out and he gets food, and he does deliberately unpleasant things to himself to prevent himself from falling asleep. But he has to be convinced to do it first. Like he doesn't want to get off the the ledge. Like, it's warm. It's the warmest part of the house. He's happy. He wants to sleep all day. He does not want to do anything. He's perfectly happy with being considered the idiot. They finally force him out. So he does the ascetic thing. He forces himself to remain awake, and he sees a remarkable horse, which is not chestnut colored. It's gold and silver, but never mind. We still call it a chestnut colored horse because that's how fairy tales work, because we need to have things that rhyme sometimes. So the horse is stomping around, and it's clearly a supernatural horse. It's breathing fire. There's steam coming out of its ears. It's an impressive thing. So what does he do? He jumps on it backwards and holds it by the tail. Because he's an idiot.
We've all been there.
Do. Yeah, but
well, you are in Texas. I assume you've all like that's some kind of coming of age thing in Texas. I assume.
You know how
like, okay, son, this is your first rodeo, and then you can be like, okay,
right,
it's
exactly,
not my first rodeo.
Right. Had a couple of beers, jumped on a horse backwards. Don't worry about it.
It's a meme. I'm telling you. It should be. If it isn't, it should be. So he holds on for dear life, and the horse begins to fly around like crazy, trying to buck him off, and not just on. I mean, it flies up into the sky, and like it's doing basically like flipping him over. And he's holding on for dear life, and he doesn't let go because he's resilient and kind of stubborn. So the horse comes down, and she's like, "Let me go, please, because you've conquered me. Like, I'd rather not be a bound creature, but you have ownership of me because you've defeated me. Like, I have no way out. So what do you want?" And he's like, "I'll give you your freedom. Just stop stomping on my wheat, please." And she goes, "Yeah, I can do that. I'll even give you one more. I'll give you the special words that whenever you need me, I will show up and I will do anything you like." He's like, "Cool. I can live with that." Because he has to remember the thing, and he's an idiot, so that's hard, but he does. He comes home and he's like, "Yeah, I found out who it was. It was this magic horse with steam coming out of his ears and fire coming out of his mouth, and I conquered it. Now, not going to be a problem." And everybody starts laughing. They're like, "What a moron! Like, I mean, come on. Like, we know that." But after that, there was no robber, and they kind of just like, "Okay, it's fine." And that's the end of part one of the story. Like, everybody's just okay with it. Right. And nobody really says anything about Ivan. It's just kind of like
it's really kind of two stories sort of stuck together.
Yeah, it is
with the horse.
Yeah. And that happens with a lot of these fairy tales. They're this is what mythologists and storytelling scientists like to do, like to cut up the pieces and show you like this is one piece and it was wedged onto this piece, which shows that it's not really an actual story. That
because whatever. A person could never have possibly thought of a story with two parts before.
Right.
Cope and seethe, folks.
Yes. Moving on. There's a king and a princess. She's in an ivory tower. She needs to be dealt with because she's too beautiful and it's becoming a danger. And this king is not so stupid that he hasn't read some of the stories and understands the repercussions of keeping said princess in the tower. So he sets an impossible task. He basically says, whoever can get her out of said ivory tower, it's wooden, but anyway, you get the idea. There wouldn't have been ivory towers in Russia. So whoever can get her out there, from there, like you have to actually climb the tower from the outside. Like you can't go up the stairs. It's not allowed. It's an impossible task, right? And get the ring from the finger of the princess will get her as his bride. And huge crowd of people show up. They're all like, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? Nobody does it. First, they're looking up like, and they're looking at her and she's beautiful. And everybody's like, oh, it's enough. You just look at her and nothing's happening. And she's like, good grief. Like, will somebody please take, put me out of my misery.
Calgon, take me away. Sorry, that's an 80s reference there.
So the sons, the two elder brothers are like, yeah, we're going to go and check this thing out, And Ivan's like, can I go? And they're like, yeah, no, you're an idiot. Not a place for you. So he's like, okay. And they go, and he's back there with the wives of the brothers. Now, the wives are just as bad as the brothers. And they can't stand him. And the brothers aren't around, so they're like, they're starting to take advantage of this, starting to make his life miserable. So he goes, I'm going to go pick some mushrooms for you gals, to help you make dinner. And they're like, yeah, sure. Here's your baskets. Go, just get out of our hair. So he goes, and he takes the opportunity to go call the horse. He says the incantation, the horse shows up. And he does this weird thing. He climbs through the left ear of the horse and climbs out the right. And when he does that, he becomes a beautiful prince. weird. The beautiful prince sits on the horse's back, and the horse flies over there, and everybody's like, whoa, who's this gorgeous prince on this super cool horse? And the horse flies up, and there are 3 tries, of course, because one does it 3 times. Each time he gets closer and closer to the princess. The first time he misses, second time he misses. Third time he grabs her ring, and he steals a kiss. Bad boy. But he can do it because he's a peasant. If a prince were to do that, that'd be a problem. And every time he does this, he makes sure to, on the way back, as everybody's trying to stop him. This is the future king of the kingdom. Don't let him escape. He makes sure to ride right next to the place where his brothers are, and he accidentally whips them with his horsewhip, which is a great little detail. Then he comes back. He climbs backwards from right to left, and becomes an idiot, an ugly, dirty idiot again. Then goes and gathers a bunch of poisonous mushrooms, brings them home, and says, "Look, I brought mushrooms for you." And the wives are like, "What a moron!" So send him back to his stupid place, and that happens 3 times. And finally, after the ring's been taken, nobody's found this prince. They're like, what are we gonna do? Like, the king's like, "I had the perfect solution, and it still failed. What am I gonna do?" So he announces a feast for the whole world. Pir na vесь mир. It's a stock phrase.
Sure.
And says everybody has to be there. If you're not, I'll chop your head off. Everybody's like, kingly feast. My head on my shoulders. I'm gonna go. So even Ivan has to go. That's the key. Like, they can't hide him in his idiot shelf. Yeah. Like, he has to go because otherwise his head's gonna. And they need him because the village idiot is very useful. He's a very useful person to have around.
A useful idiot.
Yeah. So he goes.
Say.
Yeah, there you go. So. And this is a really cool scene where there's a moment where the brothers are given a chance kind of to redeem themselves, and that's because he takes he's in his grimy little hole. Ivan is one evening, and he takes off a rag from the ring that he's put on his own hand, and the ring blazes. It's got it makes light of its own, and the whole hut is suddenly alight. And everybody in there's like, "Stop playing with fire, you moron." That's the first thing they say, right? So he covers it up dutifully and says nothing else, right? And so he comes to the feast with his finger wrapped in dirt, in a dirty rag. He's like smelly. He's like the worst you can possibly imagine. Like, it's just awful. And he sits on the last place of the last table. There are very strong gospel resonances here.
Right? Yeah, I was gonna say that's where you're supposed to sit. Yeah.
It's very, very clear. It's very clear. And he's sitting there and he's kind of just having a great time, just sitting around, not doing much. And the princess, as the shield maiden would as Hrothgar's wife would in Beowulf, walks around and pours the wine for everyone, right? So you see, like, this is another one of these cases where the ancient comes together with the contemporary. It's really in a very interesting way. And she comes by and sees Ivan, and she sees right through his dirt because she sees that his hand is wrapped. So this is really interesting because she immediately knows that's my man. And what does she do? She doesn't say, "Yuck, I will not have him," which is what often happens in these stories. She has to be convinced through magical transformations that he is the one who's worthy of her. That, especially in European fairy tales, that's a fairly stock way of doing things. She doesn't do that. She is the bride, like capital B. She knows who he is. She takes him by his hand and she brings him to her father and she says, "This is my husband." And the king's like, "What? Are you out of your mind, daughter? Like, I've done everything possible to avoid this, and here you've done the thing that you're not supposed to do. Like, what was the point of the ivory tower?" Like, no. But he's bound by his word, right? So they go and wash him. He's a man of his word. So they go and wash him. And when he comes back, he is the beautiful prince who had been appearing before on the horse. Which is, and that's it. That's kind of like the end. He becomes the prince that he is, and they're married and they live happily ever after. So there's a lot of beautiful symbolic imagery in the whole thing.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful story.
This is a cool story, and I mean, in a bunch of ways, and especially, like, my framework, of course, is probably the sort of fairy tales that most most people in America know, which is probably very heavily influenced by the sort of kind of Grimm fairy tales and this kind of thing. But like to me, there's like Rapunzel themes, there's like inverse Cinderella themes, you know. It's Cinderfella. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I see. Richard hasn't heard that term before. It's and there's right, and you can even see like there's Christ figure stuff in here too, right?
Yeah, totally.
You know that the prince comes in the guise of lowly mortality. You know, the one who is rejected, right? And also there is like in Matthew 21, where you've got the parable of the two sons, right? You know, the father who says, you know, go and work my vineyard, and the one says, I'll go, and then doesn't do it, and the one says, I won't, and then changes his mind and goes and does it. You know, you didn't. I don't think you mentioned this, but like the two sons who were sent to go and deal with the problem with the tramping horse, they said they'll go do it, and then they didn't.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
They were actually disobedient. So yeah, I mean, this does have these kind of really Christian resonances in it that I think are just super fun, super fun.
I think that this particular Ivan, his particular brand of foolishness is the you know, like sometimes the foolishness, you know, of the world confounds the wise.
Oh, totally.
Kind of like
this is a classic holy fool.
Yeah.
This is a classic Russian holy fool. And for just to be clear, because you are going to have trolls in the comment section complaining that I'm calling him Ivan the Idiot. The reason I call him Ivan the Idiot is because of the assonance, the I and the I. It just sounds better. And these things are supposed to be spoken out loud. Ivan the Fool is not as resonant or assonant, that's not a word, but anyway, as Ivan the Idiot. It just sounds better. And there is an element of idiocy to his actions. Like he's pretending to be the fool that he isn't. So it's a perfectly valid way of telling the story.
Is that word, like, you know, idiot, like that's the same as the title of the Dostoevsky novel?
Well, that's the point. Like idiot has to so it's not so obvious in English, even though that is the technical meaning of the word. Idiot is somebody who's mentally ill, like who has a problem with his brain, with his brain / mind, right? That's why in Russian it's much stronger. Like the word idiot in Russian means like you have a problem, like you need to be in a mental institution. While Durak, Ivan Durak, not Ivan Idiot, Ivan Durak. Durak is just you moron. It's like it's fool. It's usually translated fool, but it's translated fool because of the resonance with the existing phrase "fool for Christ." That's why it's often translated that way. But you know, like you can do both ways.
So, but I mean, like, what's the title of the Dostoevsky novel in Russian? Is it? It's
Idiot. Yeah.
It is Idiot. Okay. All right.
Yeah. It's not Durak. Yeah, it's Idiot.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be a straight loan word. That's not a native Russian word. I mean,
no, of course not. Yeah. I mean, idiot. Of course, idiot in English now has come to just be like an insult. An insult. You know, calling someone stupid. Yeah. Basically, we don't even necessarily mean that someone is, you know, has a mental, you know, intellectual problem, or whatever. We just calling them, you know, a moron, like you said. Yeah. Which is why I feel okay using it.
And I mean, and I think, you know, when it's set off like this, when you say Ivan the Idiot, I think it's clear that means something other than, you know, Ivan the moron. You know, like I think it's it works.
It works.
Okay. So what is the deal with going in one ear and out the other? Like, why is that a magical? Like, why is the head of a horse? I don't know. Like, why is this a magical threshold? That
you're asking all the why questions. Like, why does the hut have, you know, chicken feet? The answer is the hut has chicken feet. The answer is you pass through the horse's head. That's the answer. But you know, you can still play around with possibilities. There's some wild ones that I've heard. I mean, one is you have to consider that in a country that is mostly flatland, pre-Christian people, and also consider that there are all kinds of nomadic elements to Russian culture. even though the Rus were not nomads, but they did intermarry with their sort of with their frenemies, the Asiatic nomads who were just down the road,
Yes.
And there's a lot of, especially in the royal family of the early Rus kingdoms, would have been like seriously intermarried with Asian. I mean, they would probably look quite Asian because of the constant intermarriage between the princely families. So a horse would have been a figure of great esteem, possibly even some kind of totemic figure. Maybe not something to worship, but certainly something that has a lot of power from the other. And there would have been things like, the sun god or the sky god or whatever probably would have been astride a horse. So it's normal for, the horse's mane looks like clouds and things. I mean, these are things that I'm really hesitant to say out loud, because you're immediately kind of putting things into little boxes. But these are things that are there that are kind of informing the way that these things look, the way that these things feel and sound, and so these are the realities that would have been obvious to an audience way back when. They're more intrinsically understood by people in a modern sense. They won't necessarily think of it in that way, but it's clear that horses are important, right? So that's one thing. Like, you have to kind of pass through the experience of being a horse somehow, or like this creature from the other side, to be able to achieve your ultimate spiritual beauty of some kind. There was I'll say one thing that I think is kind of silly, but and I think I might have told the story wrong, but I think you actually have to get in from the right and go into the left, not the other way around. And the importance is that at a certain point, there is a religious interpretation in that you have to cross yourself the right way.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So this is definitely not a Crusader story because they were doing it. I mean, okay. One of the other things that I noticed also is that Ivan, so he kind of wins two prizes in this story, one for each part. He wins the horse initially, and then he gets the girl at the end. And in both cases, that's not what he set out to do, right? He sets out just to solve a mystery initially, and congratulations, you got a horse, a magical horse. And then in the second one, he just wants to see the girl. He's just jumping up. He wants to have a look at her. And oh, by the way, this is your wife now. I mean, what is that all about? Like the idea of, that's not what he was, he wasn't trying to get these great treasures, these, prizes.
I mean,
and yet that's what he receives.
It's such a spiritual allegory. I mean, it's as soon as you reach for the thing that you want, it slips through your fingers. I mean, this is, and if you reach for the easier, more attainable thing, you receive 100-fold more. There are so many spiritual resonances in this, just in terms of living out the spiritual life, living out the ascetic life, that are very resonant with Ivan's journey, without it becoming pedantic. We never really inside Ivan's head. We don't know what sort of internal transformation is happening. It's all happening out on the surface. So very clearly in the beginning, he's not somebody you necessarily want to associate yourself with, right? But like the second son in the parable, he goes and does the minimum that he's asked to do. But because he has some sort of seed of something inside him that is a potential for development in the future, he's able to kind of. And this is true of anybody in an ascetic struggle. You reach for the small thing, and suddenly you're able to do the great thing. Not because you want the great thing for the sake of the glory of the great thing, but simply because you need to acquire the small goal, but in the process of it, something inside of you is magnified by contact with a greater force than you are on the other side of the civilizational divide between town and forest, or between city and country, or things, or something like that. Because another thing that you have to notice is that part of the incantation is this weird nonsense thing, which in translation is stand in front of me like a leaf before the grass, but that doesn't make sense. And actually, most likely what it was is a mishearing that became canon. Of a word that actually isn't leaf, but trees. So actually what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to be like the grass before the tree. In other words, the wind is blowing and you bow.
Yeah.
Bow. That's your proper reference point to the thing, and then the thing comes. And that spirit of kind of self-abnegation at every stage, even as you reach for small things, is, I mean, it informs the whole story, really.
Yeah, I was reading some other versions of this fairy tale that I found, and in some of them, the thing that he's supposed to do is to go out and basically keep vigil over the farm that's been left to him by their dead father, and then his father is the one who sort of gives him the instructions for like how to use the horse to affect the transformation. But one of the interesting details in that version of the story is the way that the two older brothers are, the reason that they won't go out and keep the vigil is because they're hyper fixated on the princess. So it does a little more to like try to marry the two halves of the story. And so they're like, it talks about how they're like curling their mustachios and dyeing their beards. And
well, I mean, okay, so to be fair, that sounds like a very late retelling.
I think so. That
is like trying to make it feel more like a modern narrative.
Yeah. I mean,
which is fine. I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't do that.
Yeah. Sure. But I think it's I mean, you know, I think it's to me it seems like a sort of a natural move if you're going to retell the story and try to, you know, highlight certain things about it. I mean, this is
totally.
You know, a good way to approach retelling fairy tales is to try to find the parts that don't stick in your mind, the part of the story you can't remember, the part of the story you don't understand, and then try to say, actually, what is this hiding? Maybe there's...
So this is done often with Russian fairy tales. You have a lot of, especially fantasy, in the sort of late half of the 20th and early part of the 21st century. Russian fairy tales have been Russian, or not just Russian, Slavic in general. Because I'm thinking of somebody like Naomi Novik, who's a Polish ancestry, and she wrote several really good fantasy novels that are exactly that. You take the kind of silent bits or the unclear bits and you expand them. But the one that's the most interesting to me is one that's based on Marya Morevna. It's called Deathless by Catherine Valenti.
I ran across that when I was researching for this episode. Yeah, it's
I mean, she's a very interesting writer. She's a fantastically talented and I think a multiple award-winning fantasy author who writes absolutely beautifully. And the book is something that I really enjoyed. She really understands the whole Russian ethos. I think she was married to a Russian at that point. But it's a very postmodern book, and it kind of goes really deep into the implied darkness of why you would have a man hanging on the walls of your basement. And it goes there, you know, and
yikes.
So you could go in all kinds of directions, and that's definitely something that I do in my own fantasy novels, and something that I'm going to continue doing in the future. My own writing, because there's infinite possibilities to be mined.
And we should mention, especially for those who are maybe new and are not familiar with your work, the Raven Sun series of novels is your fantasy series, which I
did not even steeped. Promote. I gave you a chance. Promote your stuff.
He's proceeding in this humble, self-abnegating way,
so he can get the horse.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I will just say one thing, and that's that the first novel, especially in the series, is like it's so, the tropes from Russian fairy tales are so deeply baked in that I didn't even realize they were there. And having reread it like 5 or 6 years after writing it, I was shocked at how much of that stuff I had put in without even. So it's just it's all there.
Nice. Yeah. All right. Well, in wrapping up, it's time we check in with the chat. We actually had someone in the chat ask just now, is this actually live? And yes, this is actually live. Stephen Young, not to be confused with Stephen DeYoung. Stephen Young, this is indeed live, as you asked. So let's look in and see what people are saying. So
is that Father Stephen hiding under an alias?
No, he does occasionally. He does occasionally show up.
Yeah, that's 2 mentions. You guys got to stop saying his name.
Yeah, if we say his name 3 times, he's like Beetlejuice, you know.
Or like every character in Russian fairy tales, but never.
Sorry, he's like who? Father Andrew.
Stop.
All right. So actually, I see how this is amazing. My dad has showed up.
I saw that.
I know. He said when we were talking early on about when Deacon Nicholas, you were talking about how the Soviets, attempted to make use of or co-opt traditional fairy tales. My dad says, "Stalin smiled upon us, and many horses died." That's a quote from something.
Yeah.
So yes,
I like that.
Yes.
That's good.
Another person, when we were noting about how young and male the audience, according to the statistics, the demographics that we get from YouTube, actually one of your collaborators, Savannah Holler. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing her name, but you've worked with her before, haven't you? I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. She commented. She says she is a woman. So
all right.
they're not all young and male. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, YouTube is like the kind of person who's attracted to YouTube in general is young and male. So I mean, I feel
It
like
tends to be the
Yeah,
case.
that's right.
Yeah,
it's begging
that's
the question, right? I mean, like if your analytics are only on YouTube, then that's what you're gonna get.
Yeah. One of our listeners, Eric Hatchett, actually gave an almost $10 donation to the show.
Wonderful.
Eric, I think you were the first person ever to do that.
Listen, $10 more and I'll be allowed to buy a new shirt, you guys.
Hey, make it happen, people.
That's right. Donate so we can.
Unfortunately, that could not be the fool, though. Then that's.
I will say, like, I should have just come. Like, we have a priest, we have a deacon. I should have just come as subdeacon today. Like, we should have just.
What is that? I mean, what would that look like? Where you just like put on the Orarian on top of the.
That's
right. I have a plaid Orarian. It goes over the shirt.
Nice.
Yeah.
Didn't we agree on hypodeacon?
Hypodeacon.
Hypodeacon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more proper.
Unterdeacon.
Unterdeacon, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, exactly. Underdeacon. Yeah. So Emily says, commenting on Baba Yaga, she says, Baba Yaga is cooler than the witches in Brothers Grimm. I have read some of Nicholas Kotar's fairy tale books, and they are brilliant.
Thank you. That's very kind.
You got some fans.
It's not me. I'm just the translator.
My kids do really, really love them. Yeah.
Some fans in that. And Savannah mentions that her dad works for Circe, so we have to be careful about what we say. We can't call them pagans.
Oh, look at that! Somebody donated for the shirts. Okay, all right. Okay.
I was just saying this could become a trope. If people donate, we can control your word.
All right, guys. You did it. You did it. I will have a new plaid shirt next episode.
Yeah, he didn't specify. It's just going to be a different plaid.
Awesome. Yeah. Sam Cook asks, could a fairy be a godmother at an Orthodox baptism?
No.
Yeah.
That was quick.
Yeah.
No, short answer is no.
Longer answer is
I've
no.
I have a lot of things to say about fairies, but the short answer is no. They can't be a godmother at a baptism.
I think you keep that one for the Great Tales episode with Martin Shaw as the guest.
Yeah.
3.5 hours about fairies.
Here's the thing, though: if you want the real scoop on fairies, you have to buy Martin like a drink. Like it's like. Then you get the real stories. But no, we will definitely...
Treading dangerous ground here. You're going to have to start incanting things, otherwise dangerous things will happen to you.
Well, I don't think
Ancient Faith Ministries will allow me to have people buy us drinks through the donation button. I don't think that'll go over.
No, but we do intend to have Dr. Shaw on the show. I just need to arrange the timing with him, but that is something I do want to do. So
make it happen.
Which you may have to go on a quest for that and go through several portals and initiation rites to be able to actually.
Yeah. Another comment from Sam Cook. He says that he said, I first heard of Koschei the Deathless through the game RuneScape. Had to kill him in a special way. Mm-hmm. I've never played RuneScape. Have you guys played it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I played RuneScape.
Oh, obviously.
Like, I'm a nerd my age. Like, come on. Yeah. Like, yeah. I don't remember that. I may not have gotten that far. But yeah. So okay, it's a good question here. Steven says, I feel like I just made a wish from a genie. I didn't specify a non-plaid shirt. That's right.
That's right. You have to be very careful.
That's right. You got to watch it.
Wow, is Richard our show's genie, or do we, or I don't know. Maybe
I definitely
Simon, who runs our YouTube channel, he's the genie of our.
I definitely have
podcast.
an impish. I definitely have like an impish streak, as I think most people who know me know. Like literally last night, I was walking. A dear mutual friend of all of ours here to his hotel at 2 a.m. And we got this nice little snowfall last night. Long story, but anyway.
Okay.
So as we're walking, there's all the snowfall, and like the snow is like piled up on the cars and whatnot. And so as he's, I just made a big old snowball and right on his back, at 2 a.m. as we're walking through.
Wow.
And like we didn't say anything about it.
We've never discussed it ever since.
Yeah, it was great. But no, I do have a little bit of an impish streak. All right, so there's a serious question here, and the question is, Brian asked, why did Richard grimace about fairy tales having to have a eucatastrophe? Okay, so this is let me read the quote from Tolkien. Let me actually read the quote. This is from his On Fairy Stories essay. So he says, the consolation of fairy tales has another aspect than the imaginative satisfaction of ancient desires. So he's just talked about how fairy tales, one of the things they do is they sort of satisfy these ancient desires that we have to commune with
including
nature.
Talking with animals.
Yeah,
animals is a big part of a lot of Russian fairy tales.
Absolutely. So, and then he says, far more important is the consolation of the happy ending. Almost I would venture to assert that all... So, this is a very Tolkienian sentence. You have to parse it carefully. He says, almost I would venture to assert. This is three... This is a triple understatement. Okay,
yeah,
so
hedging.
Yeah, but it's three, and so if you have one understatement, then you're understating something. If you have two understatements, then you're actually saying I'm really confident about this, but I'm embarrassed. But if you have a third understatement, the question is, does it
stack?
Does it
cancel
or does it negate?
Yeah.
So this is the question.
Yeah.
But what he says is, almost I would venture to assert that all complete fairy stories must have it. At least I would say that tragedy, right, is the true form of drama. That tragedy is the true form of drama, its highest function, but the opposite is true of fairy story. Since we do not appear to possess a word that expresses this opposite, I will call it eucatastrophe. The eucatastrophic tale is the true form of a fairy tale and its highest function. So there's a lot of hedging in here. There's a lot of qualifying in here. And the reason I winced a little bit is because sometimes people will say, and I have probably said this, there's enough recorded hours of me talking about Tolkien on the internet. You can probably go back where Tolkien says, well, for it to be a real fairy tale, it has to have a happy ending. Yeah. And the thing is that this is not remotely true of
The Lord of the Rings.
It's not remotely true of all fairy tales, and certainly Tolkien knew this. It's not like he didn't know how it worked. And I think with all the hedging, like if I were to kind of read in between all of that, I would say that what Tolkien really sees is that let's say like a really complete fairy tale is going to have the eucatastrophe, and it doesn't always actually. As he goes on to explain it, the eucatastrophe isn't actually so much always about the ending; it's about the sudden turn, right? So what you got to look for in these stories is, well, what's actually the turn for Prince Ivan, right? What's the turn there, right? Well, it's when he's been killed, right, and then all of the things that he's given away come back to help him, right? Yeah. And like his generosity and actually the care that he took to sort of like, make sure his sisters were married off, which is the instruction that he was given at the beginning. I don't think Father Deacon Nicholas mentioned this, but at the beginning of the story, at least the story that you gave us, he's told, well, if a suitor shows up to marry one of your sisters, don't make them wait around. It's important to get, you can't have all these girls, just about the place. Like you got to get them married off. And so
it's not harmonious.
Yeah. And so he takes that advice, like, obviously hyper literally, right? But it works out for him. So you could say, like, that's the turn, and the turn does not actually always come at the end of the story. And that's right. Because he dies kind of in the middle.
Right. He has to do a whole bunch of stuff after he's resurrected. Yeah.
Right. But so so what I am doing now is piling more qualifiers on Tolkien's qualifiers, and just saying that we should not take this one statement as saying Tolkien is saying all fairy tales have happy endings. The implication of which is, if something doesn't have a happy ending, it doesn't fall into this category of fairy tale. So it must be some other thing. That being
said, you will find eucatastrophes in almost all Russian fairy tales.
You'll find them in most. You'll find them in most fairy tales, and certainly, when you talk about something being good or complete, one of the measures of that for a fairy tale or other traditional kinds of stories is whether or not the story is retold at scale, right? Over time. So let me give you an example of there's like 30 versions of Snow White, and in my least favorite version or most favorite version, depending on just like how curmudgeonly I'm feeling today, this is an Italian version of the story. The story is literally a paragraph long, and it just goes like it's all the normal setup that you would expect. Snow White, has to run away, and the huntsman doesn't kill her, blah, blah, blah. All right, so finally she's like out there in the woods, and she's living with the dwarves. And then the villagers get wind of this, and the villagers say, there's this young woman, and she's living with these 12 old men or 30 old men or how many there are, and obviously something is going on. And so they show up, they kill everyone, and they burn the cottage down. And that is the end of the story.
Wow.
Now,
wow.
That is
Italian Snow White.
That is, obviously, like, you can imagine the sort of person who told a story like this, and maybe why they might have told a story like this. But the point is, like, technically, okay, that's a fairy tale, but obviously it's not a complete one. It's not a true one. And it's not the version of the story that endured, right? And so
nobody ever told it again. Yeah.
Nobody's still telling it. The only place you can find it is if you just read obscure books on this stuff, right? People go around collecting it. But wow. So that's what I would say. That's what I would say. Because otherwise, like, this can get you into like kind of weird, like weird interpretive loops. Where you try to take a, okay. So it's like, all right, well, is the term fairy tale, is that actually a satisfactory, term to describe all of these different kinds of tales from around the world? Question one. Question two, well, now Tolkien says a fairy tale is a particular kind of thing. So are you saying there's like a wonder tale that's not a fairy tale because it doesn't have a eucatastrophe, and like, it's important that we kind of keep these things a little tight. So anyway, there you go.
So. All right.
Great question.
Well, I think that's a good way, I think, to wrap this up, because we started out talking about what is fairy tale, and we wrapped up here talking about a fairy tale. So everybody, especially those of you on YouTube, thank you very much for tuning in today to our very first fairy tale episode. Fairy tale, quote unquote. And our very first episode with a guest, Deacon Nicholas. Thank you so much for joining us on what we hope will be the first of many, many guest appearances on the Great Tales.
Start the countdown, everyone. And who's going to be the one that I compete with the most? It better not be Martin Shaw, because I'm going to lose.
Oh. Well, if you listener were edified by this kind of conversation, please like, subscribe, share, review. This show's home is on YouTube, but we're also on Spotify and Apple Podcast and other places like that.
If you are watching this on the YouTubes, make sure that you click the little bell below, and once you've subscribed, so that you'll be notified when we put out new episodes. I mean, you guys are all apparently 25, so you know how YouTube works. Next time, we are going to be giving an extremely thorough, detailed overview. Father Andrew put most introductory introductions, okay? But I'm writing the script so we're going to give an extremely detailed, thorough overview of the enormous corpus of legendary traditions surrounding the Holy Grail, which is one of my favorite things in the world.
I'm tuning in for that one. Ooh.
Yeah, so it's gonna be a hoot and a half, as they say. So definitely join us.
Yeah,
and
don't make any
I'll
plans
see
that afternoon.
and I will see about the shirt. I'll see about the shirt. I'll see if we can find something that's a little thematic for our next episode. So
exactly. Farewell, everyone. May you always trace the silhouette of virtue in everything that you read.
This has been a listener and viewer supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.